It was one of those frigid winter afternoons in downtown Chicago when Emma Callahan, a 32-year-old single mother with tired eyes and a determined soul, hurried into the neighborhood grocery store clutching the last few crumpled bills from her purse, her breath turning into mist as she whispered to herself to stay strong just a little longer, unaware that this ordinary day, worn down by routine and survival, was about to become the most extraordinary turning point in her life. Outside the store, her 7-year-old daughter Lily sat curled up on the wooden bench by the automatic doors, her little fingers tucked into her sleeves for warmth, her school backpack sagging beside her, and yet she wore a calmness that felt far too grown-up for her years. She was used to waiting, used to watching the world go by without demanding anything from it, used to her mother rushing and struggling, but always returning with whatever little they could afford for dinner. Emma had faced a mountain of challenges ever since her husband, Tyler, died in a construction site accident 3 years ago, a tragedy that left her heartbroken and nearly homeless, and when friends turned into ghosts and family offered more criticism than comfort, she pulled herself together for the sake of Lily, working 2 jobs, skipping meals, and walking in worn-out sneakers through snow and slush just to keep her daughter safe, clothed, and smiling. But even strength has its limits, and that day, as she walked past the cereal aisle calculating whether she could afford both milk and apples, her heart felt heavier than usual, like all the invisible burdens she'd carried for so long were beginning to crush her spirit. And then, just as she reached for a dented can of soup, something incredible happened, not to her, but to Lily, who was still outside, unknowingly about to shift the direction of both their lives with a simple act of childhood innocence. A little girl in a pink coat with curls bouncing under her wool hat had spotted Lily through the glass, and without hesitation walked straight up to her, smiled brightly, and handed her a small peppermint candy cane before wrapping her arms around her in a spontaneous, genuine hug, the kind that comes from a heart untouched by judgment or hesitation. Lily, surprised but delighted, hugged her back, and in that 1 second, something magical sparked, not the kind of magic from fairy tales, but the kind that happens when 2 souls connect through kindness. Emma, having just glanced outside through the window near the register, froze in place watching the scene unfold, her chest tightening with a mixture of confusion and awe, and just as she stepped forward to make sure everything was okay, a man, tall, sharply dressed in a dark pea coat and clearly rushing, appeared beside the girls and gently placed his hand on the curly-haired child's shoulder, apologizing quickly as he said, "I'm so sorry, she's never done that before, I hope she didn't." But then he stopped mid-sentence when he saw Emma, his eyes locking with hers in a moment thick with recognition, the kind of pause where memories, once buried, rise like waves crashing all at once. "Emma Whitmore?" he asked slowly, using her maiden name. And Emma, stunned and unsure whether to be startled or amused, nodded cautiously as she tried to place his face, and then it came flooding back, the echoes of hallways and teenage awkwardness, algebra classes and lunchroom silences. It was Mark Reynolds, the shy, soft-spoken boy from high school who always sat alone at the back of class, the one who never joined in the jokes, who got teased for his stutter and scrawny frame, and whom Emma had once defended against bullies when they knocked his books down and laughed at his tears. She had knelt beside him, helped him pick up his books, smiled and told him, "You matter more than they ever will," a gesture so small she had forgotten it, but he hadn't. "You changed my life," he said, his voice catching in his throat, and Emma's heart pounded as she stared into his eyes, now older, wiser, but carrying the same gentle soul. Mark went on to tell her how that one moment had been the first time someone saw him, truly saw him, and treated him with kindness instead of cruelty, and that it had fueled his determination to rise beyond the limitations people placed on him, how he'd worked through foster care, studied tirelessly, built a tech company from scratch, and was now raising his daughter Sophie alone after his wife's passing, trying his best every day to be the kind of father who loved without limits. Emma listened, her mind reeling not just from the reunion, but from the realization that a moment she had given without thought had grown roots in someone's heart and borne fruit years later. Mark took her number, saying he'd like to reconnect, and she didn't think much of it, until the next day, he showed up at the small diner where she worked the late shift, ordering coffee and staying until closing just to talk. Over the next few weeks, he kept coming, bringing Sophie with him, and the 2 girls became inseparable, giggling over crayons and coloring sheets in the corner booth while their parents shared quiet conversations between orders. Emma began to laugh again, her smile no longer a mask but a reflection of true warmth, and Mark, respectful and kind, never once treated her like someone broken. He simply made space for her dreams, for her exhaustion, for her to breathe. And then came the night he handed her an envelope, nervously explaining it was a job offer at his company, not charity, but a genuine position he believed she'd be perfect for, because he'd watched her multitask, solve problems, manage pressure, and show a kind of grace under fire that most leaders lacked. Emma hesitated, unsure if she belonged in the world he lived in, but Mark looked her in the eyes and said, "You believed in me before I became someone, let me believe in you now," and those words sank deeper than any compliment ever had. She accepted, and over the next few months, everything changed. Emma received training, grew into her role, paid off debts, moved into a better apartment with heating that worked, and watched Lily blossom in a new school where she was no longer just the quiet kid on the bench but a curious, thriving student with friends and dreams. Emma learned to walk a little taller, to believe that she was more than her struggles, and through it all, Mark was there. Not saving her, but standing beside her, honoring her strength, seeing her fully. Love grew slowly, like spring after a harsh winter, not in grand gestures but in everyday consistency, the way he waited for her after meetings, the way she left notes in Sophie's lunchbox, the way they both looked at their daughters like the world was made of second chances. And one snowy evening, as they walked through a Christmas market, Sophie tugged on Emma's coat and whispered, "I hope you'll be my mommy soon." And Mark turned, his eyes brimming, not with pressure, but with hope, and Emma, tears shining, whispered yes, not because she needed rescuing, but because she had found someone who saw her, valued her, and loved her for the fire she carried within. Years later, when Emma was invited to speak at a conference on the power of community, she didn't tell a story of million-dollar deals or great accomplishments. She told the story of a little girl's hug, of a memory shared and a kindness returned, of how one small act on a cold bench outside a grocery store became the bridge between two lonely hearts, healing old wounds and shaping a new future. She looked out at the crowd and said, "Sometimes we look for miracles in lightning and thunder, but most of the time, miracles look like a hug from a child, a second chance from a friend, or a voice that says, 'I believe in you,' when you've forgotten how to believe in yourself." And as the room fell silent with tears and smiles, Emma knew that life hadn't given her everything she wanted, but it had given her everything she needed, beginning with one little girl's hug and the chain of kindness it awakened that would ripple for generations to come.